How many European soldiers would you need?
If we're talking about the Ukrainian armed forces, we see it at about 800,000 personnel. And to make it 2 million, well, it's about 1,200,000 more servicemen to equalize the Russian capabilities.
Is Ukraine aiming for that? Are you actively talking to European leaders about those numbers?
Yes, I believe so, and that's probably what President would raise more and more often as an offer, as a suggestion on our side.
What did you make of those numbers he was throwing at me?
Well, I was surprised, if I'm honest, and the chances of it happening, frankly, are nil. Now, from their perspective, of course, this is what they would love to see. And I can quite understand, if I was sitting in his shoes, why I would be having that sort of conversation, because you've got to start somewhere. But the chances of Europe putting 1.2 million soldiers into Ukraine, on the ground in Ukraine, I just don't, it's not going to happen. Now, there's Poland, the various countries on the borders of Ukraine, and they have got large armies. Poland is increasing its defence expenditure quite substantially, has a large army as well as increasing elsewhere. So, to put strong European troops alongside Ukraine on the other side of the border is something completely different. The other issue, which you touched on in the interview, is Russia has said quite clearly, now, I don't know that it is a red line, but they've made it absolutely clear that they do not want European soldiers on the ground inside Ukraine. Now, these things will come out of negotiation and so forth, but even if they were to agree to that, then the size and shape of that force, whatever it would look like, is pretty difficult to pin down. Forgive me, because I may have said this to you before, but he's not wrong with the sort of numbers that you need if you're really going to provide a strong...
It's where they are. It's where they are.
Yeah. If you're going to provide a strong deterrence and the ability to fight if you need to. So, for example, we had 27,000 British soldiers in Northern Ireland in the 70s, a tiny little province. Kosovo, there was 60,000 KFOR troops in Kosovo, tiny little place. If you're really going to, the border in Ukraine is very long. The country is big. It's very deep.
It's huge.
If you're really going to put together a force that can deter and then, if necessary, fight, those are the sorts of numbers he's talking about that you would want to see in place. But the chances of the European, us, the French, the Germans, anybody else, putting anywhere near that sort of number on the ground, I'm afraid is just a non-starter.
And as you speak, it also makes very key, doesn't it, one of those demands that Russia is looking at, which is troop numbers.
Yeah.
A cap on Ukraine's military. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that either zero or a very small number of European troops are allowed on the ground in Ukraine, if indeed that's where we get to.
Yeah.
Let's say that is what happens. Let's talk about that western border then, and back up deeper into Europe, including into the UK, and what we do. If the overall numbers were something like 1 million extra, would that sound about right, or what would that mean for defence spending?
Well, it would mean a lot for defence spending. I mean, our army is only effectively the ability to deploy British troops to somewhere like Ukraine, if you like, or on the border. We would only be able to deploy at most on a permanent, on a long-term basis. I would say 10 or 15,000. We may be able to squeeze a bit more out, but those sorts of numbers are very difficult to see.
And Ukraine has recently confirmed it's lost 55,000 soldiers.
Yeah, and Russia's considerably more, of course. And a lot of youngsters are leaving Ukraine because they don't want to be conscripted. They're mobilising, but within a relatively narrow band of age groups. The Russians haven't mobilised yet. It is absolutely understandable that this is where he's coming from. Russia has the ability to put a lot more people on the ground than Ukraine does. There's just absolutely no doubt about that at all. But I just don't think that the European powers have got the size, shape and scale, are prepared to spend the money, and in doing so, send a very clear message that they would be prepared to fight a war. That's the last thing that's going to be on most European leaders' minds. They want to put in sufficient to deter, but the chance of them actually being engaged in a war with Russia, I just think it's not on the table. I do feel for President Zelenskyy. I mean, his speech, which you referred to, which I think he talked about Groundhog Day, if I remember rightly, he is absolutely right. European leaders have talked a good talk for 3-4 years now. I'm not saying we haven't done anything. We put a lot of support in, but from his perspective, from a Ukrainian perspective, it's all talk and not an awful lot of action. We've tied his hands behind his back in terms of long-range, deep fire capability, and we've given him stuff, slowly, very reluctantly. And I would think that President Zelenskyy is pretty worried at the moment. He must be actually dog-tired. Yeah. The poor bloke must be emotionally drained.
He looks it, doesn't he? Yeah. Well, you would. I mean, you would. It's normal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Horrible, but normal.
Now, that all said, I think I've said to you before, I'm not convinced that there will be a negotiated settlement out of the current round of talks. Because absolutely, as he said, the idea of handing over territory that Russia has been unable to gain militarily, I just find that it's not going to happen. And particularly because that particular large chunk of that territory is really Ukrainians' seriously important defensive fortifications. If they were to give up that ground, they're giving up the equivalent. It's not a very good example, actually, but they're giving up the equivalent of something like the Maginot Line, or serious defence capabilities.
Yeah, there's a reason that Vladimir Putin has focused so much attention on it, isn't there? Because it's strategically important to him as well.
The guy you just interviewed made it very clear about the land in Donbass, which is a red line for Ukraine, but it's also a red line for Russia. They've both written into their constitutions there's things that they now can't do because it's in their constitutions, which means they will continue fighting. And I think Zelenskyy and a lot of these arrogant Ukrainians at the moment criticising Europe and the West for not doing enough is ridiculous. They have the right to put their own men on the front line to die. They don't have the right to ask us to put ours on the front line to die.
Well, let me respond to what you said there about both sides having equivalent red lines, because I'm not sure that they do. Ukraine is the country that has been invaded. Ukraine has already lost Crimea, lost parts of the Donbass. It is merely saying this far and no further.
Yeah, but it can't do that because it will lose it in the long run anyway. And Russia, because they're going to lose the war. As simple as that. The general that you've spoken to said they don't have the manpower. He said it out loud.
Yeah, but he didn't say they're going to lose the war.
Well, it means that if you haven't got the manpower to fight a war, you won't win it. At the end of the day, people don't understand that Russia is in this for the long game.
No, Nick, he was talking about the UK don't have the manpower at the moment.
No. He said the Russians don't. The Ukrainians don't. When he was talking about the desertions and the lack of men because of young men leaving the country. Ukraine is running out of men. They don't have the men to put on the front line. It's one of the reasons why the Russians are slowly being successful, because they're widening the front line. They've got the men to put in there, and they haven't even started conscripting people yet.
So what? Have we wasted our time, in your view, in Ukraine?
Well, I think we have. I think what we've effectively done, and I'll be called a Putin apologist for this, is we've taken, and the analogy I use is somebody seriously injured in intensive care unit being artificially kept alive with all the machines until eventually they do die, and that's what we've done with Ukraine.
Well, hang on. This is a sovereign nation that has the right to say it doesn't want to be Russian, doesn't it?
Oh, you can talk about what you think is right, but you can talk about reality as well and what is going on the ground. And Ukraine was never, ever going to win this war. And
but do you accept it's a sovereign nation?
Of course it's a sovereign nation, absolutely.
Well, then it has the right to fight, doesn't it?
Oh, it has the right to fight, absolutely. But
and we have the right to support it because the aggressor against them has clearly shown himself to be an aggressor against us too.
Well, this isn't about what rights people have. This is about what is the reality on the ground.
Yes, but how we respond to the reality affects that reality, doesn't it?
Because Russia will win it whatever we do.
Whatever we do?
Yes. We're never going to put troops on the ground. The only thing that potentially would stop Russia
we've offered to in the event of a peace deal.
No, before a peace deal, because you have to get to the peace deal first.
But my guest wasn't just talking about before. He was saying if you can sit passively waiting for the next attempt, or you can become so strong that the next attempt isn't even made.
Yeah, but they're never going to get to that point. I mean, we're talking about red lines.
He didn't just mean them. He meant all of Europe.
No, I understand that, but as the guy said, your colonel said, again, a Russian red line. There is going to be no European troops on the ground. They won't do it because it would make this whole fight pointless for them.
But what about the wider question of European spending on defence, on troop numbers, for example, as well as kit?
Well, you've got that side of it. I don't believe Europe has got the appetite.
See, I think part of what he was saying about those numbers did include wider European armies numbers. I don't think he thought for a second almost 1.5 million European troops were going to march into Ukraine. I don't think that's what he was suggesting. But he was suggesting that they need to be ready to do so and we're not, are we? We're not ready. We're barely ready to defend London in the air.
Well, we're not ready anyway, and it just won't happen because I don't believe there's a European appetite.
But isn't what he said a kind of call to arms in a way? You know, are you happy with our defence at the moment when you've got serious people telling us we couldn't defend London in the air?
Well, I don't think we can even defend the Channel at the moment. We can't even stop little green boats coming across
it's not quite the same,
Channel. What are we going to do in the rest of Europe?
So how do you feel about that?
I think it's been around for so long now. I mean, since the Falklands, what have we done? What wars have we been involved with? We're very good in the West at getting involved in wars against people that can't.
No, but you're misunderstanding my question. I'm not talking about us getting involved in a war, or we are involved in that war, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the longer term picture of our defence, UK, Europe, Ukraine, our defence against a very aggressive Russia.
Well, firstly, I wouldn't agree that Russia is particularly aggressive against the West in the terms they're being highlighted, as in we need to be afraid that Russia is going to attack Europe and invade us. I don't believe that's a possibility.
Well, it's already attacked us, hasn't it?
Well,
in a number of different ways.
Because they're struggling to take Ukraine, Sheila, so there's no chance.
No, it predates Ukraine, the attacks we've had on Russia, from Russia.
Novichok
is pre-Ukraine.
If you talk about things like the Novichok attack and stuff like that, I'm talking about the want to take territory, and Russia hasn't shown that. If the only countries that have shown that has been the West.
But a war isn't just about territory anymore, is it?
The last caller had a reasonable point in regard to this small boat thing. It is a different topic, obviously, but it does play into why you struggle, or why the country will struggle to recruit for our military, which is the real problem here. Because whether people like it or not, the UK Army is made up of about 80% of the non-officer roles. So the boots on the ground, really. You're talking 86% are white working class. Yeah, that's the recruitment that they should be targeting, but they don't target that anymore. They target, they want more diversity in the army, etc. You also have the same white working class lads don't want to fight for this country anymore. They don't want to fight for this country anymore because all they've seen for the last 20 years or so is government after government shipping millions upon millions of other people. Their entire ecosystem, everything that they know has completely changed. They don't feel connected. They essentially feel displaced in their own country. So why would they want to fight for it? So it's all well and good, you can have a general or whoever.
In what way do they feel displaced in their own country, in your opinion? Obviously, there's lots of you're lumping a lot of young white men together here,
Because their entire the communities that they live in have radically changed over the last 20, 30 years, all without their permission. They didn't ask for this. So what they're seeing is a country that doesn't look like their country anymore. And this is something that I hear from young white people all the time, young white working class lads all the time. And it's it's a disheartening thing for myself anyway. I mean, I'm in my 50s now. I wasn't in the military myself. My father was in the army. I remember living on an army camp when I was really small.
What if it's not their country that they're fighting for in their minds? What if it's their lives and their families' lives?
But that's not the case, though, is it?
Oh, I don't know. Who knows what's going to happen?
I don't see Russia in any way, shape, or form anywhere near invading the UK.
I'm not talking about an invasion in the way that we might imagine from World War II. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about other things, other ways.
In what sense, Sheila?
Well, if they decided to, clearly they can send agents over and poison people in Salisbury till they die. If they decided to sit in a busy theatre or cinema or tube station, or we've seen attacks like that in Chechnya. We've seen them in Moscow, actually, against the Russian people themselves. They can do whatever they want to do.
Technically, they could. There's several countries that could do what they want to do.
I'd fight back against that, wouldn't you?
Most people would fight back against that.
That's what I'm saying.
You're bringing a point up that's basically saying if you were endangered yourself, would you fight? It's like myself. Would I fight for this country as it is right now? In other words, to enlist and go into a war on a foreign soil? No, I wouldn't. If it was something that I felt was threatening me or mine, yes, of course I would fight. Anybody in a right mind would fight in those circumstances.
But only if you and yours were threatened.
Yes. I've no interest in...
Other people.
I have no interest in, for example, Ukraine and Russia. I don't see that as anything to do with the UK. Because at the end of the day, Russia are not about to steamroller over Europe.
Well, have a look at your fuel bill, Mark, and get back to me.
I want to just touch on some of the points you made in the previous caller, maybe avoiding the stuff around small boats. I don't see how that's relevant. I think you said you weren't expecting kind of a Russian invasion, but Russia can impact us.
Well, in the UK
ways.
in particular, because
in the UK in particular, right? Exactly.
Because of water.
Because of water, right? But I really don't see how. And you mentioned there's a risk of, I don't know, a potential poisoning, a Russian spy coming to the UK and poisoning somebody. I don't see how an additional number of troops will avoid that issue. There's violence all the time. That's not going to be stopped because you have a few thousand additional troops.
It's more than a few thousand, isn't it?
More than a few thousand.
In this guy's maths, yeah.
Yeah, well, no matter how many, I don't think it's going to avoid those kinds of violence. And it seems to me like the wars of the future aren't going to be based on troops on the ground. It's going to be based on technology. You have China just announced they're planning on building a autonomous fighter jet, and we're talking about boots on the ground to tackle Russia. It seems a little backwards.
Well, we haven't had a conversation about air defence much in this hour, but that's a factor too, isn't it?
It is. I think certainly we need to be spending more on technology than we do on physical people, just because, as the previous caller explained, I mean, although I disagree with his rationale as to why, it seems to me like the public is generally against investing, for want of a better word, people into foreign wars or into defence. I think the attacks from Russia are already apparent and they're already clear in the UK at the present point. They've heavily invested politically. There's nothing stopping a Russian oligarch from starting a business in the UK and influencing us that way.
There's a bit more than there was, isn't there, before Ukraine's invasion?
Yes, but there's nothing to. I'm not sure. Maybe on if there's more or less, but we don't seem to be doing anything to reduce that.
But it's interesting. Can I go back to what you said about numbers of actual physical human soldiers? I take on board everything you've said about technological development. That's always a facet of war, isn't it? It has been forever.
Yes.
But I remember an exchange between Tobias Ellwood, when he was chair of the Defence Select Committee, and the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson. You might remember it yourself, where Boris Johnson was saying, this was again predating the Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Boris Johnson was very dismissive of the idea that ground wars would ever take place again, because Tobias Ellwood was talking about the kind of infantry and kit that we needed. He was essentially, Boris Johnson was essentially saying, no, those wars are over. And yet, on the eastern border of Russia with Ukraine, there is essentially a war that, for all the drones in the air, on the ground, looks very much like World War One.
Yeah, it does, but I'd like to think that we have a more advanced military than Ukraine.
Well, we've given them loads of our stuff. That is our military.
That is our stuff, but they didn't necessarily have the advanced military tactics that we do.
Yeah, but there are Russian soldiers on the other side of the border fighting in exactly the same way.
So your argument is that
that all of it is happening, and that's my argument. All of it is happening.
Your argument is that apparently technology is not sufficient enough, so we should contribute more lives.
No, I'm not cheering for this. I'm not cheering for this.
You seem to be making the argument though that technology is insufficient, so we need more manpower.
No, I'm not talking about insufficiency of technology. I'm talking about human behaviour and how so far human behaviour for all the technology still involves killing each other. Hand to hand or almost hand to hand or, a few metres away from each other. That's what's happening on the border between Ukraine and Russia at the moment. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that won't change. War has changed, in many ways since 100 years ago, 200 years ago, however many hundreds of years ago you want to look back. Of course it has, because of the development of technology and weaponry. But human beings haven't changed.